Welcome back to the Bridgeton Beacon. In this episode, we're going to feature a conversation between Beacon founder Meg McCormick-Horner and her producer Tom Ritter as they discuss expanding the channels of fundraising for local nonprofit media with respect to the community being able to get involved with projects like memory podcasts or sponsoring a Bulldog where we work with local area youth in media production, or sponsoring the Bridgeton Beacon in general to shine a light on the local stories and members of the community that make Bridgeton and the greater Bridgeton area a great place to live. So here's Tom, the producer, and Meg McCormick-Horner talking about ways that the Beacon is going to interact with the community this year. All right, so I'm redoing we have a few fundraising channels for the Bridgeton Beacon that we, certainly want to focus on, and we've got some neat stuff that lets audience or supporters interact in new ways. So just from top to bottom, we've got this sort of general fund, which there's a campaign. We have links on the site. We have Give Butter where that's kind of like the GoFundMe style vendor that helps us collect and keep track. And so that's on the website. We're adding both sponsor a Bulldog program that we were doing, that we initiated with the Cultural and Heritage Commission, and we recorded with Rashawn, and we've done some of those. So that's where any individual or business can contribute to that project specifically to support us guiding an area youth through the pre-production, production and publication steps and all the software involved, and essentially teach them about media related to whatever story it was we do with them. And so that's a really great program. It's just the ability for somebody to put a little skin in the game, to literally put a local kid through a one-on-one course where they're helping to produce media that we actually use on the Bridgeton Beacon.
Right, because we're going to continue to do that. That's going to be an ongoing project of ours.
And an example of that is anybody can Google Bridgeton Beacon Riverside Renaissance or Bridgeton Beacon RRCA Arts, and you'll see the episode we did with Rashawn. And finally, there's another essentially product/publishing tool for the Beacon that is Memory Podcasts, which is a potentially wonderful tie-in for local history and local beacons of the community. And that's the ability for someone to sponsor a one-on-one podcast with a local area elder or somebody who's got great stories. But essentially, you're picking a person, and we're going to record their memories and make sure that whatever perspective it is that made you want to pick them to begin with, that we memorialize that. We'll publish it on the Beacon. It'll be a great sort of keepsake and legacy piece for anybody who's a loved one of that person long term. And that's a very sort of bite-sized way for somebody to contribute to local nonprofit media and also shine a light on somebody that they might want to personally recommend for a little bit of, that Beacon sparkle, and we get great stories out of it.
Yeah, I think that new project, the Memory Podcast, is really an exciting new feature for the Bridgeton Beacon. And for anybody who is listening to this, in terms of just clarifying what our vision is for that project, is that something where the individual who is contributing to the Beacon to be able to, as you said, a spotlight on a family member, an elder in their community, would that person be conducting the interview, or could they have the option to have you or I do that? What were you thinking about?
I think we're probably better serving their dollar as a contribution to the Beacon if we do it as the host ourselves, simply because we're practiced enough to avoid any pitfalls that someone who's conducting that process for the first time is very likely to discover. If we do a handful of these, someone will make the same mistakes that we made early on in podcasting. And I should further that by saying, however, I am working on a kit based on the initial people we work with. And the initial people we work with, I have set at a very promotional price point to get some examples in, because I think it's so wonderful. And when people see it, there'll be no shortage of people who want to do them or support or share a memory podcast. I go through half a dozen or 10 of those. It will take the rough edges off a kit I've already started that would allow anyone with an iPhone or a Android to really produce the same type of effort. And whether they do that with the Bridgeton Beacon or not, if they just wanted to get a loved one recorded just for their own sake, we're putting together a package that shares the tools we know about and the ways that they can make that happen, within reach of a typical user. If you have a smartphone and a computer, you can make a really great legacy podcast for one of your elder loved ones, a friend of the family, whoever. And I am putting the final touches on that. So that might be the kind of thing that we put out. And potentially it's a suggested donation where people can even access that potentially for free if we're not doing any of the work. And then a suggested donation. And also if they wanted to share that with the Beacon and get it published, there's the potential that could be the case.
So they would have the option to permit us to air that on the Beacon, or alternatively just keep it private for their own circle family members, because you might have some people that want to
I think
record. But they might not want it produced and published to the masses, although there might be other people who say, yeah, this is really important and we want to share it. That topic of
And with audio, Meg, they might be more open, because even then we'll be in a situation where we can say, can we use clips that keep the name out of it? Because they're 99% of the recording, they won't be using their own name. So even if we can repurpose some of that for South Jersey stories, if they don't want the name out there, we don't need to use the name, but we would just love to use the audio. Somebody telling a story about a landmark or an event in history that they were there for in South Jersey. If they don't want us to shine a big light and make it all about that person, and it can be totally anonymous how we publish it. And I think those would be really interesting. But that's anything to get more information and stories out would sort of be the way we would lean. Clearly, if I'm considering giving away a kit that'll let people do for their own purposes.
I mean, it's such an important, that idea I was going to say of an oral history, right? Primary source material, like you said, interviewing a grandparent or an aunt or uncle about something specific that they witnessed, that they saw, that they did, that they can share. It provides value, obviously, to the family member who wants to preserve that memory. But it also provides a great contribution to the community to be able to have that, right? Whether it's just the audio or whether it's the audio and the video. And so that's something, too, as an option to give folks. Some people might be very willing to record a phone call, but they really don't want their face out there, right? So,
well, I was going to say I don't see any video at all to start with, because there's no way to control for people. So when I was saying that we can use audio that is anonymous, that just means a clip that doesn't have any personally identifying information in it.
And that reminds me of what NPR does, right? NPR,
exactly.
That StoryCorps. They, I listen to NPR. I've listened to it for a long time, and you'll hear clips from their StoryCorps programming. And I believe, because I had looked into this years and years ago, before the Bridgeton Beacon even started, and never, unfortunately, followed through, and I regret that now. But I think that you could reach out to them. They'd send you the equipment. You could record with a family member. You send it back, and then NPR just produces discrete clips from that recording. And I don't believe they even give the person's name. But what they then do is they preserve it through the Library of Congress. And that's something I want to look into. The Library of Congress.
Well, I was going to say the Millville Library.
We could start there. Or the Bridgeton Library.
We'll work our way. Oh, yeah, Bridgeton Library. What am I talking about?
Yeah. So, but these are all great ideas, and they start by gauging interest in the community, and that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, it's all the same sort of feel-good, down-home, corny goodness that we love to begin with. So
yeah, but it's not really corny. Who wouldn't want to have? I would love right now to have an audio recording of a conversation with one of my grandparents. Who wouldn't give the world for that?
That's in the first paragraph of my service plan for this is that very, while you can preserve the memories that matter most and the voices that you most want to hear. It's crazy that people don't. It's crazy. When this came to light and I thought, oh, what a great idea, I hadn't found out that people are already doing it. But once you've had the idea, you're like, well, why haven't we just been recording Grandmom in the kitchen for the last 10 years? What is wrong with us? She's every other weekend, she's in there, yelling at Mom about this recipe or that. We should collect all that very important culinary knowledge and start Grandmom's, sort of legacy podcast. But it's unbelievable how obvious of an idea is once it's been in your head once. You're like, how did it even take me that long to think of it? And how did it take the person who knew it before me, came up with it? They should have had it way before. Like, this is so obvious considering what we've had in our pocket for well over 2 decades now.
Right. And I mean, and it's a great way to also support the Bridgeton Beacon while you do it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a win-win for everyone.
And so there's a way to elaborate that on as well. We're not making any money on a memory podcast through the Bridgeton Beacon at any of the price points I'm considering once this is live. But the idea is that any activity, we get such great response that we should not necessarily look to grow by any method other than putting more skin in the game and looking for greater response. So it's, and this is a lightweight way to expand production to lots and lots and lots of members of the community who think they've got a gem to talk about. And that's all this has been about from the beginning, is give us a gem to talk about, whether it's, when crabs are in season, who's got them? The Bridgeton Invitational Baseball Tournament, the Minerva Fire Company evolving into Cumberland Mutual Insurance, rather. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's a million of those we haven't uncovered, and it's like us giving everybody in the Bridgeton area sort of a metal detector of their own to say, hey, this is good, a good nugget, let's funnel it into the Bridgeton Beacon by activity alone and not charging them an arm and a leg for that activity.
Well, right. I mean, that's the whole reason why to apply 1C3 nonprofit status, is because we want any contributions that anyone makes to the Bridgeton Beacon to go right back into producing great content for the community. And, I'm a member of a Facebook group called Bridgeton Memory Lane, and it's so just wonderful to share from people about their memories related to the Bridgeton area. And while we also focus on the here and now, the past is such an important part of that. So this is kind of a way for us at the Bridgeton Beacon to join those two things, right? Past and the present. And like you said, kind of document and preserve a memory. So I'm really, really excited about this. I think that in addition to the Sponsor Bulldog project that we started last year, this is maybe one of my most favorite things that we're doing right now.
Yeah, it's my favorite. I did speak with some Cumberland County area hospice professionals, people who run hospice, I said, hey, I didn't give them a specific pitch, but I said, hey, I'm doing this through the Beacon in South Jersey. It seems like a wonderful legacy tool. And I sent that out to people I know, because the first email I sent was, hey, I think this is such a near and dear kind of thing. I want you to evaluate the way I'm presenting it, because I don't want to seem like in any way no. It's a money-making scheme or something. But I'm so in love with the idea that I get excited about it. And I literally, the first people I shared it with, I was like, hey, just screen this, because I'm just so excited. And I'm afraid it's going to sound like I'm selling something that's too good to be true.
Well, no, I mean, we're not. Again, we're a nonprofit. We're trying to provide this service to the community. So, we are presenting it to those that are interested in it. And if they are, wonderful. And if they aren't, understand. So I think there are a lot of different groups that might be interested in sharing this among their members. And I think it's just a great thing.
Yeah, and it's, to my knowledge, it's going to be the lightest, easiest way to get plugged in to a podcast situation and, have a bunch of highlight clips the next week to share with the family is, get Uncle Bob into the pipeline as a Bridgeton Beacon memory podcast, and we'll be chomping at the bit. And we've got really great tools for prepping for those. We collect a little bit of information when they register, but all we need is a little information for us to be able to prompt them and really drive the conversation. They don't need to worry about scripting or too much planning. It's just bring your memory and your personality and let rip with what you think is interesting. And we were very good at just letting you roll. And
Right.
if you run out of steam on one area, we know more than anybody a real easy way to get you to keep talking just in a slightly different direction, especially because we're coming into the room with area history, area economics, area demographics. So all they need to do is provide a little information to us, and we get immediately sort of clued into what's going on and can drive it from there.
Yeah, I mean, what we may want to consider, I know that you had mentioned a couple minutes ago that you or I or someone else on behalf of the Beacon would be kind of the interviewer. We may want to consider being the facilitator of a conversation between grandparent, grandchild, aunt and uncle, niece and nephew, older person, younger person. That way you've got kind of that dynamic between the two. That might make it even more special, but we can kind of try that out as we go. I mean, I think from
I
a
think there's
logistic
sorry for interrupting.
Yeah,
If
no,
you're
I
going
was
to
just
say
going to say
the
from a
logistics will
logistic
be
standpoint, the
easy,
question's going to become, is it going to be on a
but
service
hang
like
on.
Riverside?
Yeah, so here's the more people you add to the conversation, every person doubles your chance that some shit's wrong for that call. And the call's going to have to be canceled. Every time you add a customer, a whole new customer, which is any participant, their audio and everything, what's the success rate for cold off the street participation in a podcast is what concerns me, because there's always issues, and it's going to be a whole different customer group that isn't necessarily doing it from their business desk, which is what we're used to. So I'm more hesitant to do that. And also my thing was like, if I'm going to CBS, I want Charles Kuralt, or I don't want Grant. I want the local reporter on the Bridgeton Beacon. That's the legit version of getting interviewed. Like, then Grandmom was on the Bridgeton Beacon. Recording Grandmom with a nephew, I think, has a lot less value. You can do, and also go do that today with your iPhone, you idiots. Like, why would you pay us for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I'd be willing to see what people who listen to this think. I'd love to get feedback from the community on that. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily know what to ask a person that might end up being a little nugget that is special to the family down the road as they listen to it in future years. But that,
Well, that's why we get a
there
little bit
might
of
have to have
information
some
at
sort of
registration.
information, right? So there might
No,
be.
that's required.
Okay.
And
So walk me through what you're thinking with that.
well, so based on that information, if they give me certain decades, if they give me certain schools, certain work experience, where do you think I turn next with that to make it valuable to us, to make it valuable to them? I turn around and turn on about 14 different AI programs and say, hey, I've got a 68-year-old person who grew up in this town during this era, who is not in a family, who is not a working professional, who is not a grandparent, who is not a sports fan, who is not that much, and cut it off there with some AI tools. And it's not going to say, hey, what's your favorite sandwich? It's going to say, oh, they grew up in this area during that decade. Do they remember this ice cream shop? That's so much better than you or I could do off the top of our head to begin with. And so part of hiring the Bridgeton Beacon to be your host is the fact that we've got 2 years of AI experience into a lot of the stuff we already do with prepping for whatnot. I've sent you, not much lately, but I've sent outlines before of like, hey, here's a topic. They're unbelievably extensive and would allow us to, bar none, at least research that topic further in a very expeditious and educated way, or rely on it almost entirely if it's something we've tested before as part of a procedure. So that's what I was thinking is, and also the family member is going to ask the obvious questions. I think the value we bring to the table is a question that elicits who they are and what they're all about, what their experience was. But if it's a question you didn't expect to hear, I think that resonates with a lot more sort of volume. It seems to me that people will literally say, I never would have thought to ask that. What an interesting question.
Right. Although it
Oh,
may
lost Meg.
also be helpful to have a questionnaire that the
Hello, my
family
baby.
member
Hello, my
that
darling.
is sponsoring this fills out. So we
Meg
do have
Horner
some
disappeared.
personal tidbits
I'm
to
the new
share.
editor-in-chief of the Bridgeton Beacon. Apparently there's stuff blowing around in my yard. Tornado today. Expect Meg to rejoin the conversation presently.
And we're back.
Oh yeah, the value, just finishing up on the value of like, think having questions that are kind of out of left field, which aren't hard to come up with. Like I said, if you name an ice cream place that grandma hasn't thought of in 50 years, home run. Like how many, I think you're really taking your chances on the spectrum of quality of discourse when compared to that by just making it an open. I think that's a different product. I don't think that's a
Okay.
Bridgeton Beacon. I think that's like
Yeah, I mean,
Bridgeton's Chatter or something. It's straight up. You know, we can produce for people and it can go on a page, but if it's just for fun, it's just a different tone, I think, than, you know, having bespectacled Meg Horner or cowboy hat wearing Tom Ritter or whoever we add in who has those tools at their disposal for making sort of a robust showing if because I don't think there's much prompting required most of the time. But if
okay.
and
I
when
was just going to say that several years ago, and I won't say the name of the company so I don't run into any kind of copyright problems here, but several years ago, for Christmas, I purchased something for my dad, and it essentially sent him writing prompts um, every week, I think, for a period of time, and he would, type in the answers. A memory from high school, or your favorite ice cream store, that kind of thing, like you're saying, and he would type it in, and he could uploaded some pictures, and at the end of the time frame, they put it together in a book and sent
is
it
it
to him.
Memento?
What's that?
Memento?
No, different one. I'll tell you after the call, unless you want to just bleep it. But in any event, my thought was we could have similar type prompts
Oh, that's
to.
literally exactly what we're talking about.
Okay.
Except they're customized based on what some input that they give us when they register. Then we just schedule for a week later. And it's not like we're setting them up for ongoing. I just need to run something. I need to take that info, drop it into something that I have formatted to process that info into 30 questions. You might only need 2 questions. But
Right.
it'd be a hoot just to even send them away with those questions that I think some of them are so cool.
Right. So if this is an audio only product, is this, I mean, one of the easiest ways to do it, just throwing it out there, is how we started the Bridgeton Beacon, which is recording a phone call. It could be as simple as that if you're thinking audio only.
Potentially,
Um,
sure.
yeah. So just something to consider as we develop this. But I mean,
Yeah, agreed. Imagine
ultimately,
that you've got a call scheduled with the bridge. That's so radio.
right.
I like that about it. It's so radio that it hurts. So I would love to do phone interviews, and we can do
Right.
that very easily. Yeah.
Right. And then the person who wants to have this, who's given a contribution so that they can have a kind of a more structured interview with a family member, could then receive either, that kind of disc or link or however you want to provide it to them for their keepsake forever. Or again, they could then thereafter ask for it to be produced on the Bridgeton Beacon, perhaps under, a separate link or separate heading on our page obviously with their permission or a portion thereof.
Well, there's a bunch of offshoot options there, including turning it into written text in a hardcover book. So that whole workflow is pretty much where it's headed. But the light, easy sort of phone call to either go through the beacon or go, have them do it just on whatever some sort of side thing we can do. The upsell from there is if you want it on 5 USBs, do you want it on a website? If we have to start taking care of hosting and make sure there's shiny delivery of some keepsakes, we can merch that out and nobody's going to complain because wrap it into the total value. It's still preposterous what we're doing for what we're charging. So I think those are great ways to sort of add icing to the cake and say, okay, great. The memory podcast is this, which is positively ridiculous. And then if you want to add 5 or 10 USBs, if you want it, hosted on the Beacon on its own sort of little page that we'll send you a link to. We do that all day long. It is a little work. It would be great value to them because they don't have to worry about things like YouTube and what's going to work, what's going to not. Do we have to keep hosting something? Did Spotify get bought by YouTube? Do we have to move to a new host?
And then, of course, you can always, as a separate through, niche podcast, create a private family podcast for a family that's private to them. I mean, you've done that for companies, right?
Sure. If it's Jersey,
that would be through a niche podcast, not the Bridgeton Beacon necessarily, but they're all things that are possible. I mean,
that's basically what a memory podcast is if you're not in New Jersey. So I've got 49 other states. So I think if we're getting good stories in New Jersey, anything I can do to funnel them through the Beacon seems like getting double the win.
Because it provides such value. I mean,
and we might still publish them. I was thinking maybe memory podcasts might be the venue, which will already be built because I'm going to have just regular private customers build a channel. So maybe the Beacon doesn't even have to. And maybe there's even more value if we mix them into the public, like YouTube or whatever you call it over there as the just sort of fun one, not the official Bridgeton Beacon. You just made me think of that might be a good way to partner and not have to build another whole channel.
Right.
Kind of things. So forgive me for jumping in. I needed to get that documented before I went out and started buying domain names and building new websites. Sorry.
What this all makes me think of, though, is, as you know, I'm working on the Paul Hunsberger Off the Cuff project. And for any listeners who may not know what that is, Paul Hunsberger, 40, 50, 60-year radio host on WSNJ, interviewed 13,000 people. I had interviewed son Dan several years ago. It was one of my first audio interviews on the Bridgeton Beacon. I think we try to kind of mirror or pattern what Paul Hunsberger did so many years ago by interviewing luminaries, visionaries, people in the area. Long and short of it was able to track down his granddaughter out in Texas, and she very kindly went to a storage unit and found 1,700 photos of folks that he had interviewed, a small fraction of all of those folks that he interviewed, and an even smaller fraction of audio tapes that I have actually sitting right here that I'm working on. We're trying to gather more. So many people, and I put this out on Bridgeton Memory Lane, so many people are like, oh yeah, my aunt was interviewed or my grandfather was interviewed. How wonderful would it be if we had that audio now? We have some of it, thanks to his granddaughter sending it to us, and that'll be the subject of a much bigger project in the next year or two. But what if we had more of it? And this is a way to preserve and memorialize interviews among the folks that our listeners think should be interviewed, not just who I or you go out and interview. So the beauty of what Paul Hunsberger did was he interviewed everyone from Liberace to Olympic athletes to many local housewives, right? Everyone's story is important and worthy of preserving and sharing. And that's what we do at the Bridgeton Beacon, and that's what this memory podcast opportunity will give. Everybody's story is important and worthy of preserving.
So you've mentioned the Hunsberger project. So then I'm going to go ahead and take it a step further and say that we're also going to be building on Give Butter and within our Beacon Donate page, because that Hunsberger project isn't a one-time write a story. The Hunsberger project is 4 figures worth of imagery that can go into a database, a folder, if you will. But we're going to use, in advance to just sticking it in storage, we're going to intricately code these images so that we can associate them with the time and place and people and topics and sentiment that they were associated with in whatever future previous life they had, to whatever extent we can find information about them. So a picture that brings up so-and-so with Paul Hunsberger, there is more than likely going to be information about so and so. So it'll broaden the depth of information that we're writing about and producing just by having had a picture of that person. So our ability to take the Hunsberger collection, if I may coin it, the Hunsberger collection, I'm so delighted.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That the actual work around making that an incredibly efficient, usable tool meaningful for the Bridgeton Beacon, in that the Bridgeton Beacon could potentially have 100 extra stories next year based merely on the presence of this Hunsberger photo archive driving interest and driving editorial. So we're going to have another little sliver of our donate section specifically to that. There's going to be some really cutting edge hosting software processes with that. It's not going to break the bank, but it's not the kind of thing we thought of when we founded the Bridgeton Beacon,
Perfect example is most of these photos, and I'm in the process of cataloging them right now. I have a name on the back. And so, the local photographer, Connolly Moy, who took all these photos, had written the names on the back with a date. Several did not have the names. And so I'm going to be trying to figure out who those unknown individuals are. But for example, one of the photos that didn't have a name, I was able to determine is Diane Kinkle Johnson, who was Miss Bridgeton in the late 50s and 60s. My mom thought that might be who it was. I ended up going on Genealogy Bank, and I found a picture of Diane Kinkle Johnson and was able to say, yeah, that's who that is in this photo. And so now I'm able to tell who she is, and I can, as I'm cataloging it, properly identify her. But what I think you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that now we could link that photo. Unfortunately, I don't think I have her audio interview, but we could link that photo that I do have with stories about her that we pull off of the Bridgeton Evening News or other area newspapers from that time. And so we're building this basically, a database, so to speak. Is that right? So that anybody then can log in, can search her name and get links to all of these things that we've found through our research.
That's
basically what you're saying?
What you described is one thing we could do, although there's other processes we could do. For example, once we have the name, there's a great likelihood we can find success associating an era with that name, because Bridgeton is not Manhattan. So if you get a Hinkle Johnson name, you're going to be able to at least narrow it down pretty quickly to the point where potentially outside of Genealogy Bank, that we're using general AI database and large data models to do the research, not just Genealogy Bank. Although we don't have to build to connect to those models today. We have to build to connect to Genealogy Bank. I have a feeling I'd want to read the terms and conditions of Genealogy Bank before I start automating any processes that mine its content.
Yeah, but perhaps we get a family member who is in the area or not in the area, quite frankly, who wants to call in and talk to us about.
Awesome. Well, why don't we borrow an idea from Big Milk and start building a folder of people you don't know, and let's throw them up on the screen in the beginning of the Bridgeton Beacon and say, we're attempting to inventory Paul Hunsberger's. So we can crowdsource the Hunsberger project to some extent, I would think. Mm-hmm. Or possibly a blog post would be better, because then people could comment. And forgive me.
I was going to draw on Bridgeton Memory Lane Facebook page, because that group did seem to have a
perfect interest. The way to do it then is to post it on the Bridgeton Beacon blog, and that's the link you post on Bridgeton Memory Lane.
Okay, well, we can start that.
Yeah, because then we're building the same repository. Every contribution becomes searchable for future purposes.
Right, and I should say that part of this project is not just cataloging, but it's also scanning these photos in a high-quality manner, so that we can share them online, right? Not just
it's
take
astonishing.
A picture and post it.
The quality is unbelievable. I had no hope. I was happy to get these pictures, and I was excited. Yeah, great, let's see them. We're definitely going to use them. But the quality that was delivered in the one sample I've seen is incredible. So
Right.
I would
Right.
use it in video in a way I wouldn't use many legacy pictures in video. But my goodness gracious, these are solid. And then, yeah, to your point, the process is then you have to get them extensively meta tagged so that they stay in a drive that's accessible to our editorial, but also our AI. Because when we're making a video, the video will know if we need backup images that are from a certain era, if they're from agriculture, if they're from the Bridgeton High School football team, or if they're from the Bridgeton Invitational Baseball Tournament. So as long as they're socked away and the data is clean tagged, it plugs into some very high-end processes just by existing.
Right. I
And
mean, that's something that if someone wants to, contribute, because this is a big project in and of itself. And, I'm going to be hiring some part-time employees with the approval of the Bridgeton Beacon Board of Directors to assist in this process. But if that's something that's near and dear to any of our listeners' hearts and they want to contribute specifically to that project so that, just to help fund those costs, because it's a big undertaking, we can certainly set that up through our homepage. I mean, ultimately, I'd love to do a documentary on Paul Hunsberger, because I think that what he did over all of those years is what we're trying to do now.
I can say with confidence that if we build some information about Paul Hunsberger in a great big giant folder, if we've got imagery, and if we start to build some content around that imagery that's original, that we can put out a documentary very, very efficiently after a couple years of sort of just collecting Paul Hunsberger into that project and all that was around him. The ability to then analyze. So it's just collect, and then it becomes very powerful to execute. Whereas if you're like, let's write a book on Paul Hunsberger. What should chapter one be? I would say, who cares? Let's collect as much information and dump it into one place, because AI is so good at helping us figure out where we should prioritize, how we should maybe outline the delivery, and then execute on the outline of the delivery.
Yeah.
Without that, we're not putting anything out, because there's only a few of us at the Bridgeton Beacon, right?
Well, right. Both of which, when we all have other full-time jobs. The beauty of what we're doing, though, too, is to link it to the present by calling on members of the community that are here now living, that want to share their memories of that time frame, right? And so the story is about them now, here and now, right? And all the other people that are in the area doing great things. So we can, that's the beauty of what we're doing in this project, is tying the past to the present and maybe the future.
Yeah, it's
exciting.
A good time.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of different links you can follow and a bunch of different little niche projects people can support, from cool stuff like digitization and AI of old media from Bridgeton, or sponsoring a local youth who wants to get involved in some sort of new media, or just a general fun where, hey, keep going out there and interviewing farmers and, oystermen and brewers and whoever the heck else is mixing it up in the greater Bridgeton area.
Yeah, and if I think that if there's anything that people want to hear us talk about or look into, or anyone that they want us to interview, remember, you can go right on your phone on bridgetonbeacon.com. There's that send a voicemail on the side. Send us a message, or you can just email us, bridgetonbeacon@gmail.com. Let us know what you want to hear. I mean, there's no newspaper that focuses exclusively on Bridgeton, and we're trying to fill that gap. So let us know, right? Any listeners, let us know what you want to hear.
100%. And if you haven't, hit the subscribe button on YouTube and then click the little bell underneath the subscribe button so you actually get alerts when we post new content. And that's a great way to help us grow.
All right. Nice chatting with you today.
Yeah, good stuff. I'll get to work on some of that, and we'll have all those links set up as we put this video out and tell people what's going on.
Outstanding.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon. Bye.
There's a couple great ways to support the Bridgeton Beacon. You can go to bridgetonbeacon.com/support. for a number of options, including a very cool new program we're running called Memory Podcasts. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Simply go to YouTube, search Bridgeton Beacon, go to our homepage, click subscribe, and when you do, also click the bell icon so they actually notify you when we post new episodes.